the Prophecy Club. We are going to talk about this gun confiscation. Now, as I've already had another broadcast, and I showed you scriptures why I believe that ultimately, one of these days, gun confiscation will take place in America. Look, you cannot have the kind of bad things happen to a nation that the scriptures say are going to happen to America when the populace is armed. Very simply put, Bill Schnoebelen explains how the federal government mind control programs can force a person to do anything they want, including shooting innocent children. Bill ties the start of these programs all the way back to the start of these mass killings and leaves little question that this is, in fact, the work of evil in high places with plans to confiscate our weapons and leave us a helpless populace open to the mark of the beast and lopping off of our heads. Now, Bill Schnoebelen.
And this guy, his name was Hasani Sabah, and he has the dubious distinction of being the world's first terrorist, the world's first spy master, and the world's first mind control expert. And he was a member of an Islamic sect called the Ismailis. Now, most of you probably know there's two major sects today in Islam, the Shia and the Sunni. And you know how Muslims are about diversity. They hate each other's guts, the two of them, these two sects. That's part of the problem over in Iraq right now, is that they're blowing each other up right and left. Well, there's also a tiny little sect, a third sect within Islam that's called the Ismailis. And naturally, these two big groups, the Sunnis and the Shias, have been trying to kill them and wipe them out for 1,000 years. Now, this guy was a leader of that group, the Ismailis, and he realized he could never prevail through numbers, just like Al-Qaeda figured out that it could never prevail against the United States on an open battlefield. And so instead, this guy resorted to terrorism and mind control and espionage. And what he'd do is very simple. He would bring recruits to his castle who were zealots. They wanted to, die for Allah. And he would sit them down and give them a sumptuous meal. And he would lace that meal with hashish. That's why this group is called the Order of the Hashishim. And by the way, that's where you get the word assassin. Our modern word assassin is a derivation of the name Hashishim. So anyhow, he fed this guy lots of hashish. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands if anybody's used marijuana in this church or if they've used hashish. I have. And I'll tell you, hashish is very powerful because it's a distillation of marijuana, of the active ingredient in marijuana, which is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, popularly known as THC. That's what gives you the buzz when you smoke a joint. Well, hashish is many times stronger than marijuana. And what marijuana or hashish basically do is they make everything you do feel better, taste better, smell better. That's why you get the munchies when you smoke pot. I can remember back in my hippie witch days, I would I'd go through 5 bags of potato chips in 1 hour. I was because everything tastes just so wonderful. And of course, making love is quite extraordinary on pot. But the problem is, pot is 400 times more carcinogenic than tobacco. And it also gunks up your brain. See, I was gifted by the Almighty with a photographic memory when I was a young man, when I was a college student. And then I started smoking dope, and it kind of went away. And I've been trying to get it back for the last 20 years. And it's getting better. I'm taking lots of good herbs, But anyway, the point is I'm not trying to stand up here and say, you all got to go out and smoke dope, because the downside is awful, aside from the fact that, of course, it's illegal. So it'll really mess you up and give you cancer. In fact, when I worked in a drug agency, oh man, we saw some people that they couldn't find their way out of their own pajamas without help because they've been smoking pot so long. And there was a slogan we had that if you smoke dope, it'll take you 3 times longer to respond when somebody says, hey, stupid. So this guy would give his candidates lots of hashish. They would get, as we say in the 60s, zonked out of their skull. He would carry these candidates into this inner garden in his castle. And there were beautiful, fragrant flowers, wonderful palm trees, babbling brooks, and lots of gorgeous women. Because you know what is the Islamic Paradise, right? You get to eat pork, which is forbidden to Muslims on earth. You get to drink the wine you want, which is forbidden to Muslims while they're on earth. And you get 72 virgins, and you only get 4 wives on earth if you're a Muslim. So therefore, just think of that. You get 72 virgins. So this guy's in this garden, and all these women are pawing him and everything, and he's just having the time of his life for 2 or 3 hours. That's how long the high lasts. And then when he starts to come down, they bring him back, set him in the chair in front of Hasani Sabah. And he says to him, I have just taken you to paradise. If you serve me in jihad and die in the service of Allah, that is where you go, where you die. And the guy says, where do I sign up? Where do I sign up? Because he's been given a very real taste of what he believes to be heaven. And so this is what this Hassan guy would use as his elite army. And what would happen is that in Islam, in the medieval period, these two sects of Sunni and Shia were run by, they were called caliphs. And the groups were called caliphates. And they were like religious theocracies, dictatorships, run by these caliphs who had the blood of the prophet in their veins. And they would come up against this man, this Hasani Sabah, and attack him in his castle. And thousands of soldiers. But never did they actually succeed in getting near his castle. Because what would happen is, he would have some of his men stand up on the parapet, 1,000 feet overlooking a valley, in front of all these other troops. And he'd snap his fingers, and a dozen men would leap to their death, smiling all the way down. And the troops would flee in terror, because they knew they didn't want to fight somebody that crazy. The other thing he did is he invented the mole. What's a mole? I'm not talking about the little rodent that tears up your lawn. I'm talking about an espionage concept where you bury someone deep in an organization of your enemies. And they sit there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and then all of a sudden, you need them, you give them a signal, and they kill someone or whatever. And there's a story told that one time one of these caliphs was ready to invade Hassan's castle in the mountains of Alamut. And he went to bed that night surrounded by 100 retainers, men who'd been with him for years, including a lot of his own sons, armed with scimitars. He woke up the next morning, there were 9 Hashishim daggers buried in the pillow right around his head. And there's a distinctive dagger. He knew they were his because it's like a dagger that looks like a little wavy, almost like a flame. You've probably seen pictures of them in books. So anyway, he fled because he knew there were 9 people in his elite staff that would kill him at the drop of a hat. This was the beginning of modern mind control. This was the beginning of the Illuminati. And in seed form, everything that this guy did is present today, of course, more technological improvements in the modern day Illuminati and in modern day mind control. When this man died, his last words were, "Nothing is true, everything is permissible." And he died in his bed, an old man. Now, what happened is the Crusades started just about the time that this was all going on. And supposedly Christian knights came over to reclaim the Holy Land from the Muslims. And among them were a group called the Knights Templar. You've all heard of them, I know. And I know I spent a lot of time talking about them in a couple of my other videos, but I need to touch on this. What happened is the Knights Templar were warrior monks who were supposed to guard the sacred places in the Holy Land, the tomb of Christ, the site of the crucifixion, all these different things. And they were dedicated. They were supposed to be religious zealots. And they fought the Hashishim. And then they became friends with the Hashishim. And then they brought the secrets of the Hashishim back with them to Europe when the Crusades were over and they came home. Now, the Knights Templar were vastly wealthy. They were the richest entity at that time in Europe. And they were wealthier than the Vatican. They were wealthier than all the crowned heads in Europe put together. In fact, all the crowned heads in Europe and the Vatican were in hock to the Knights Templar. Because how many of you realize the Knights Templar were the world's first bankers? They were the world's first international bankers. They invented the traveler's check, and they invented the high-interest loan. And so, because of this, because the Pope was in hock and the King of France was in hock to the Knights Templar, they conspired to take them out. And in the 14th century, they were suddenly fell upon by French soldiers, and thousands of knights were taken prisoner, tortured, and burned at the stake. But many of them escaped, and they took their treasures with them. They had their own fleet. They were that big an organization. They had a fleet of ships. The ships, most people believe, sailed through the Mediterranean, around the Strait of Gibraltar, and up to Scotland. You've got to realize at that time, Scotland was like the farthest reaches of the Holy Roman Empire and the farthest reaches of the Catholic Church. And the Scots did not like Rome. So they hid out the Templars there. And in exchange, the Templars helped them fight the English. And what's interesting is you can go over there, and we did this when we were over there ministering in the British Isles, and see 800-year-old tombstones in Scottish castles that have Knight Templar markings on them and Freemasonic markings on them from 800 years ago. Now, the thing I want you to remember about these guys is that they are the basis of much of Masonry. And in fact, the early Scottish Rite started because of them up in Scotland. Now, when the Templars were put out of business, part of them hid in Scotland, part of them went underground.
We'll be right back after this message. Some of you know that each Hebrew letter represents a number, a picture, sound, and color. But probably what you don't know is it also contains a code which finally unseals the prophecies of Daniel. In his new Prophecy Club DVD, Hebrew, the Rainbow Language, David Matthews will show you how to use the code to finally unseal Daniel and the rest of the Bible. Prophet Stephen Hansen has given over 1,200 amazing national prophecies, and in his new DVD, Divisions Leading to the Internal Revolution, either by vision or audible voice, Steve tells you what God has shown him about fires in New York City, the invasion of America, the new Madrid fault line, Texas separated and parts are underwater, and what will happen in 2013. Each DVD valued at $30, get both for a gift of just $45. Order at 785-266-1112 or prophecyclub.com. And now, back to the program.
Now, when the Templars were put out of business, part of them hid in Scotland, part of them went underground. And a few years later, they emerged as a secret. It was called the Invisible College. Doesn't that sound mystical, though, the Invisible College? And they were all involved in learning the healing arts and the secrets of mind control. And their outer name was the Rosicrucians, the ancient mystical order of the Rosy Cross. And while Stan did not mention this, I was a 9th degree member of the Rosicrucian Order, and I was taught these things. Now I want to draw your attention to that symbol. That is the symbol of the Rosicrucian Order. And you'll notice it's all covered with occult symbols and alchemical symbols. And in the very center, you'll see there is a rose with the petals on, and then they have the Hebrew alphabet on them. And in the center of that, there is a rosy cross. And what that is, it's a gold cross, like what's called a Latin cross, like what we associate with Christianity. And in the very center of that is a 5-petaled scarlet rose. That is the consummate symbol of the Rosicrucian Order. And all it is a variation of the Knights Templar symbol, which is a scarlet cross. Now, what does this symbol mean? Well, the golden cross symbolizes the solar phallic Christ force. Okay? The rose, the ruby rose, symbolizes the lunar, eternal, feminine goddess mysteries. And it was believed that the Rosicrucian Order fused these two. And so when you today you hear about like the Da Vinci Code and all of these different things, and the sacred feminine and the mysterious feminine and Sophia and all this kind of stuff. This is where that originated in its modern form, was in the Rosicrucian order. And that is what this is supposed to represent, a fusion of the male and female goddess and god figures. And the Rosicrucians teach you powerful mental exercises. And these mental exercises are called hermetics. Now, you may not be familiar with that word, but hermetics, and it doesn't have anything to do with like being hermetically sealed. The name goes back to a sage in Egypt. He was considered to be, I refer to him like this, he's like the anti-Moses. Like today we all are familiar with the Antichrist. Well, he was the anti-Moses. Because at the same time as Moses was coming down the mountain with the 2 tablets of stone that had the Torah on them, in Egypt, he was creating the Emerald Tablet, which had all of the maxims of occultism on it. The number 1 maxim being this: as above, so below, but after a different manner. That is the cardinal rule of the occult, just like, it's kind of like, if you will, the golden rule of occultism. And because of this, his followers, his name was Hermes, Trismegistus, which means thrice greatest Hermes. You know what his symbol was? It was a staff with snakes circling around it. And that's why some of you may notice the symbol that's used for the medical profession. It's called the caduceus. Yes, that's the term for it. And you might also notice, is it FTD, the florist company? And they have the symbol Mercury running with flowers. Well, Mercury is the Roman name for Hermes. And you notice he has his little helmet on with wings, and he has little wings on his feet, and he's got in his hand the same exact staff. That's the caduceus. And it's a symbol of Hermeticism. We'll talk more about this in a couple minutes. But this is where the Hermetic tradition flowered in Europe, was through the Rosicrucian order. Okay, the next step we'll have to go through is right at this same time, there was a Spanish knight named Ignatius Loyola. And he was wounded by a cannonball in his leg, and he had to convalesce in his castle. And while he was convalescing, he had an enlightening experience. He became illuminated. And he decided he wanted to dedicate his life to what he believed to be God. And he wanted to start an order of illuminated men who would be warrior monks. See, does this sound familiar? It's like there's a trend here. We have the assassins who were fanatical Islamic warriors. And then we have the Templars who were fanatical Christian warriors. And then we have this group that Ignatius Loyola was starting. And so he went to the Holy Father in Rome, and he said, I want to start this society of elite, enlightened warrior monks. They will be like your Gestapo. Of course, he didn't say that because the Gestapo wasn't in existence then, but that's what he wanted to do. And he says, and I want to call this order Los Ilumbrados, which in Spanish means the Illuminati. Isn't that interesting? This was 200 years before Adam Weishaupt came along. And the Pope said, no, I don't think that's going to play well in Peoria. So let's call it the Society of Jesus. Now, doesn't that sound pious? The Society of Jesus? I mean, it just sounds all warm and fuzzy. And I'll tell you, these men are formidable. They're brilliant. It takes 12 years to make a Jesuit. After college, it only takes 8 years to make a doctor. So, they're taught mind control. And if you want to know what the Jesuits are taught, they're taught hermetics. What is hermetics? It is the science of mental magic, of the ability to do inside of your head entire complex magical rituals by visualization. And I was trained in this. It was the first thing I was taught. When I was made a first-degree witch, I was given a book by Franz Barden, who is one of the greatest sorcerers of the 20th century. It was called Initiation into Hermetics. You can still get it today. And it teaches you how to control your mind to the point that you could, like what I would do, for example, one of the exercises is I had to go out in the middle of a blinding blizzard. And in Iowa, we got blizzards just like you guys have here. and sit naked in a snowdrift and melt the snowdrift by emanating heat from my body through hermetic science and other such things. And the only way I can describe it, those of you that may play chess, imagine playing a chess game blindfolded and winning, never seeing the board. That's what hermetics is, except the chess pieces are demons. It's that simple. Now, if you want to find out what these exercises are that the Jesuit Order does, all you have to do is go to your public library and pick up a book called The Spiritual Exercises of Ignatius Loyola. And that has most of the beginning exercises. I did these things myself because they're taught in most Catholic seminaries. The other thing you need to realize about the Jesuits, though, is that they're very Jesuitical. Now, that's actually an adjective. You go to a large dictionary and you look up the word Jesuitical, you'll find a picture next to it. The picture will be of William Jefferson Clinton. I'm kidding. But how many of you realize Clinton was trained by Jesuits? Georgetown University is a Jesuit school, and his mentor was Professor Quigley, who, of course, wrote the book. What was it? The Tragedy and the Hope, I think was the name of it, that basically spilled the beans about the New World Order because he felt that it was so far advanced that there was absolutely nothing that Christianity could do to stop it. What does the word Jesuitical mean? Well, our beloved ex-president, Bubba, is an excellent example of Jesuitical. That's why I made that little witticism. It means cunning. It means deceitful. It means mendacious. It means a consummate, skilled liar. That's what Jesuits are famous for, because they have a doctrine, and it's the doctrine of this, mental reservation. Remember when you were a kid and somebody would say something, you promise me that you'll do something for me, and if you put your hand behind your back, you'd say, yes, I promise. It didn't count because you had this behind your back. That's the doctrine of mental reservation. And the Jesuits are taught that they can lie, even under oath. They can put their hand on a Bible and swear in the name of God that that such and such a thing is true, and then they will lie as long as mentally they think the truth. That's called mental reservation. And it's not a sin as long as they do it for the greater glory of God. And that's their motto, ad maiorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God. But the trouble is, their God is the Pope. And they take an oath. And the oath, I won't go into some of the more gross parts of it, but the oath in part says that they will be as clay in the hands of the Holy Father for him to mold in any way that he wants. The oath also says they will be as a corpse in the hand of the Holy Father for him to move and manipulate any way he wants. And they will never ask why, they'll just do it. And of course, today many of you may know that in the Vatican there's this interesting hierarchy. There's the Holy Father, the white Pope that you always see on TV, and then there's the black Pope, who's the Secretary General of the Jesuit Order. And they have an uneasy truce, depending on how Vatican politics is going. So, here again we have the concept of mind control. And today the Jesuit Order is illegal in many countries of the world. It's considered a subversive society, and they're not allowed into many countries, even countries that are heavily Catholic, because they're so subversive. But of course they go in anyway, they just go in undercover. Next step, the Freemasonic movement. Many of you may not realize that the Jesuits helped put together Grand Lodge Freemasonry. They helped put together the Scottish Rite. The Grand Lodge of England was the beginning of modern day Masonry, and then the Grand Orient Lodge of France in 1733. And what you need to understand, and I didn't fully appreciate this until I was down ministering in Brazil a couple months ago. We here in America are under the Grand Lodge of England. In Brazil, they are under the Grand Orient. And that is an extremely anti-Christ organization, much more so than the Grand Lodge of England. It's vicious in its attacks on our Savior and on Christian principles.
Time has run out, but I want to say thank you for listening, and thank you for your prayers and your gifts of support. God bless. Now from the Prophecy Club, some exciting opportunities for you. Some of you know that each Hebrew letter represents a number, a picture, sound, and color. But probably what you don't know is it also contains a code which finally unseals the prophecies of Daniel. In his new Prophecy Club DVD, Hebrew, the Rainbow Language, David Matthews will show you how to use the code to finally unseal Daniel and the rest of the Bible. Prophet Stephen Hansen has given over 1,200 amazing national prophecies, and in his new DVD, Divisions Leading to the Internal Revolution, either by vision or audible voice, Steve tells you what God has shown him about fires in New York City, the invasion of America, the new Madrid fault line, Texas separated and parts are underwater, and what will happen in 2013. Each DVD valued at $30, get both for a gift of just $45. Order at 785-266-1112 or prophecyclub.com. Okay, you want a deal? Well, I've got a deal for you. Got 4 DVDs valued at $120 for a gift of just $40. First, you get Bill Schnoebelen's Mind Controlled Gun Confiscation, and he explains how the federal government mind control programs like Monarch can force a person to do anything they want, including shooting innocent children. Bill ties the start of these programs to the start of mass killings and leaves little doubt that this is the work of evil in high places with plans to confiscate our weapons. Dr. Stephen Houston talks about the rise of the beast, the 10 European families that could become the 10 toes of Daniel's statue, the Vatican and Jesuit Order, the occult and Pope John II's funeral, St. Hildegard's prophecy, 3 world wars, the link between the Catholic Church and Freemasonry. Then, 2 DVDs from Stan Monteith. First, his famous Secrets of the Illuminati, where he exposes the evil elite that rule the world. And second, in Planned Population Reduction, he exposes the dangers of Vioxx, artificial fertilizers, pesticides, injections, immunizations, vaccinations, genetically altered seeds, cell phones, diet drinks, soy products, mercury preservatives, MSG, aspartame, fluoridated water, suppressed cures, chemtrails, anthrax, cancer treatments, DDT, creative diseases, milk additives and processes, MTBE, Splenda, and that's just a few of them. 4 DVDs valued at $120 for a gift of just $40, and if you order before April 1st, you get free shipping. prophecyclub.com or 785-266-1112 or prophecyclub.com. Order the Spring Gift Offer. The Spring Gift Offer. prophecyclub.com. The February gift offer is Angels at Work. Prophet Leslie tells of many examples in her life in which the Lord set forth his angels to bring back lost items, keep her loved ones out of harm's way, and comforted her in difficult times and directed her footsteps. You will learn how to call on ministering spirits in time of need. Be uplifted, encouraged, and build your faith. In True or False Prophecies, also by Prophet Leslie, she helps you to recognize the lies and false information that can lead you away from the truth. Topics are: recognize a true or false prophecy or prophet, receive the best blessings, receive a double blessing, recognize the anointing for the spirit of prophecy. Then, Will You Survive America's Fall by Doug Metzger is talking about how he had a very radical salvation and God began to immediately give him visions. He shares 16 visions of America's future, and he was shown how unspeakable torment is coming to America to turn us back to God. Topics are: America the Fallen Tree, vision of how the church was formed, vision of a nuclear missile, 12 cities destroyed, 1,000,000 voices screaming, 2 explosions, 10-to-1 inflation, dollar becomes worthless, the begging woman and the turnstile, the great betrayal, only prayer is protection, and the greatest horror and revival at the same time. Angels at Work, $20. True or False Prophecies, $30. Will You Survive America's Fall, $30. 3 DVDs valued at $80 for a gift of just $45. It's the February gift offer, available at prophecyclub.com or calling 785-266-1112.